60,000. That is a conservative estimate. When a healthy, established colony of Italian honeybees is forced to relocate under duress, they don't leave anyone behind. They take the workforce, they take the nursery, and they take the queen. Karen Mitchell made sure they had to move. She decided that my backyard apiary, which had been standing quietly for 4 years, was a personal affront to her property value. She decided that the law didn't apply to her need for a sterile environment. So, she took a heavy-duty garden rake to my hives on a Saturday morning while I was at the hardware store. She wanted the bees gone. She wanted my illegal livestock off the property line. She wanted a bee-free existence where nature was something that happened to other people, preferably on television, not over her fence. She got her wish. By Saturday evening, there wasn't a single bee left in my yard. They had moved 75 feet west, up, through a gap in her vinyl soffit that I'd been meaning to tell her about for 3 months. By Monday morning, the entire colony, 60,000 stinging insects, 5 pounds of wax, and a furious queen, had established a new permanent residence inside the wall of her master bedroom. She called code enforcement to report me for unleashing a biological hazard. She called the police to report me for assault by insect. The officer she summoned wrote me 0 citations. He cleared my property in 6 minutes, but when he looked at her house, when he saw where the bees had gone, he handed Karen a notice for structural disrepair, harboring a public nuisance, and 21 other violations she'd been hiding behind her fence. And the quote she got for the removal? It was $3,800 more than the hives she destroyed. But let me tell you how Karen's war on nature started all of this. I have been a beekeeper for 12 years. It isn't just a hobby, it's a discipline. My setup is precise, methodical, and aggressively compliant. I run 2 10-frame hives, painted a solar reflective white, sitting on cinder blocks that are leveled to within a millimeter. I keep Italian honeybees, Apis mellifera ligustica. In the beekeeping world, these are the golden retrievers. They are gentle, they are productive, and they are singularly focused on foraging. They don't want to sting you. Stinging you kills them. They want nectar. I had them registered with the State Department of Agriculture, permit number 2024-0911. I had the registration laminated and zip-tied to the leg of the hive stand. I followed the municipal code to the letter, and then I added a safety margin. The code required hives to be 15 feet from the property line. Mine were 22 feet. The code required a flyway barrier to force the bees upward. I built a 6-foot cedar privacy fence. The code required a constant water source so they wouldn't visit neighbors' pools. I installed a solar-powered fountain with pebble landing pads. I loved watching them. There is something meditative about morning coffee on the back porch, watching the foragers launch like little cargo planes heavy with purpose. It was a thriving, quiet ecosystem. Karen Mitchell lived next door. Karen did not believe in ecosystems. Karen believed in sterilization. Karen's property was a testament to man's dominion over nature, and man was winning. Her lawn was a chemically dependent shade of green that vibrated. It was the color of a pool table and just as soft. She didn't have flower beds. She had mulch zones, dark, dyed black mulch with sterile, perfectly spaced shrubs that never seemed to grow and never seemed to die. She vacuumed her driveway. I am not using that as a metaphor. I watched her on multiple occasions take a shop vac to the asphalt to remove stray leaves, dust, or the errant petals from my cherry tree that dared to cross the property line. She fought entropy with a nozzle attachment. We had a polite, distant relationship for years. I would wave. She would stare at my dandelions with deep existential suspicion.
She regarded my yard, which I manage as a pollinator-friendly clover mix, as a cancer that was slowly eating away at her property value. "Your weeds are migrating," she told me once, leaning over the fence. "That's white clover, Karen. It fixes nitrogen in the soil. It looks messy. It looks like you gave up. It feeds the bees." That was the mistake. I shouldn't have mentioned the bees. Until that moment, she hadn't noticed the white boxes behind the cedar screen. But as soon as I said the word, her eyes snapped to the corner of the yard. "You have bees?" "2 hives, yes." "Like swarms?" "Colonies. They're contained." "I have an allergy," she said immediately. "It was a reflex. If I get stung, my throat closes up. I could die." "Do you carry an EpiPen?" She looked offended. "I shouldn't need to carry medical equipment in my own backyard. Those things are dangerous. Are they legal?" "Fully permitted and registered." She narrowed her eyes. "We'll see about that."
That was 6 months ago. Since then, it had been a cold war. She installed a camera pointed directly at my hives, a little white eye blinking red at night. She started spraying pesticide along the fence line, heavy industrial stuff that smelled like burning plastic. I had to move the hives another 10 feet back just to keep the drift from killing the brood. She filed complaints with the city about noise. Bees hum at 120 hertz, which is quieter than her air conditioner, but she reported it anyway. She filed complaints about odor. She filed complaints about swarming. Every time I documented it, I kept a log. April 3rd, Karen sprays Roundup through the fence slats. April 12th, Karen yells at the hives for 10 minutes. I didn't know she was planning an offensive. I just thought she was loud. The escalation moved from bureaucratic to kinetic on a Tuesday. I came home to find a lawyer's letter taped to my front door. It wasn't mailed, it was taped, which meant she had walked onto my porch. "Notice to cease and desist to Mr. Mateo Torres. You are hereby notified that your maintenance of dangerous stinging insects constitutes a clear and present danger to the life and safety of Miss Karen Mitchell. The buzzing sound is causing psychological distress. The presence of insects is creating a zone of terror, preventing Miss Mitchell from enjoying her curtilage. Immediate removal is required within 48 hours or legal action will commence." Attached to the letter was a printout from Wikipedia about Africanized killer bees with several sentences highlighted in yellow marker. I walked out to the backyard. Karen was there, standing on a stepladder so she could glare over the 6-foot fence. "Did you get my letter?" she asked. She sounded triumphant. "I did. Nice use of the phrase zone of terror, Karen. Did you draft that yourself?" "My attorney is very aggressive." "Your attorney's letterhead is missing, Karen, and this is Comic Sans font." She flushed. "The format doesn't matter. The liability does. If one of those things stings me, I own your house, I own your truck, I own everything." "Karen, they are Italian honeybees. They're more interested in the clover than they are in you. Unless you attack them, they won't sting you." "I can't go outside," she shouted. "I'm a prisoner in my own home because you want to play farmer in a subdivision." "You're outside right now." "I am gathering evidence." She held up her phone and snapped a photo of me. "I'm documenting your refusal to abate the nuisance. I've called the city manager. I've called the police. I'm calling the news. You are raising biological weapons." "They pollinate your azaleas, Karen." "I hate those azaleas. They drop leaves." She climbed down from the ladder. 48 hours, Mateo, or I take steps." I didn't take the threat seriously enough. That is my fault. I assumed take steps meant more fake legal letters or perhaps a call to the zoning board. I didn't think she meant physical violence. I spent the next 2 days double-checking my compliance. I remeasured the setbacks. I checked the water source. I added a fresh coat of white paint to the hive stands just to make them look professional. I was operating under the delusion that if I followed the rules would protect me.
I also installed 2 new cameras, one on the back corner of the house looking down at the apiary, one on the fence line looking back at the house. I wanted coverage. On Friday afternoon, while checking the camera angles, I noticed something about Karen's house. I'd never really looked at her property in detail. My eyes usually glazed over from the sheer monotony of her lawn. But the camera's high-def zoom picked up details my eyes missed. Her house was pristine at ground level, but the second story, specifically the west gable facing my yard, it had issues. The vinyl siding was warping, and right at the peak of the gable, where the soffit meets the roofline, a piece of the vinyl vent had popped out. It had curled back, leaving a dark rectangular gap about 2 inches high and 10 inches wide. It was a perfect entrance. In the wild, honeybees look for hollow trees. They look for cavities that are high up, defensible, and roughly 40 liters in volume. In the suburbs, they look for soffits. That gap led directly into her attic space, likely right behind the knee wall of her master bedroom. I thought about telling her. I actually picked up my phone to text her, "Hey, Karen, you have a gap in your siding." Then I looked at the cease and desist letter on my counter. I looked at the Wikipedia printout. I put the phone down. Not my yard, not my problem. Saturday morning was perfect bee weather. 65 degrees, light wind, heavy nectar flow from the early spring bloom. The air above the hives was a highway of activity. I needed lumber for a project in the garage. I left the house at 8:30. I waved at Karen, who was sweeping her porch. She didn't wave back. She was watching the clock. I was gone for exactly 45 minutes. When I turned back onto my street, I saw it before I even pulled into the driveway. The air. The air above my backyard wasn't the usual organized and visible highway of foragers. It was a visible dark cloud, a brown static of confusion that hung over the fence line like smoke. My stomach dropped. I parked the truck on the lawn and ran to the back gate. The sound hit me first.
A healthy hive hums. It's a low C major chord of contentment. This wasn't a hum. It was a scream. A high-pitched, frantic whine of 60,000 creatures in panic. I opened the gate. My apiary was gone. The hive stands were kicked over. The cinder blocks were scattered. The white boxes, my carefully painted, leveled boxes, were smashed open on the grass. The frames inside, holding 4 years of comb and brood, were scattered like debris from a plane crash. Honey was oozing into the dirt. Wax was crushed into the lawn. And the bees? Thousands of them were crawling over the wreckage. Dead bees were piled in heaps where they had been crushed. The living ones were spiraling in the air, looking for the queen, looking for the enemy, looking for home. And standing in the middle of it, holding a heavy-duty steel garden rake, was Karen. She was wearing a heavy winter coat, a scarf wrapped around her head like a mummy, and ski goggles. She looked like a low-budget sci-fi villain. She was swinging the rake at the remaining clouds of bees, screaming, "Get out! Get out! Leave!" I pulled out my phone. I didn't yell. I didn't try to stop her. She was in a frenzy, and a woman swinging a rake in a cloud of stinging insects is not someone you approach physically. I recorded. "Karen!" I shouted from the safety of the patio. She spun around. She looked deranged, but also triumphant. "I solved it!" she screamed through the scarf. "I solved the problem. Now clean up this mess. Look at this mess you made." "You are trespassing," I said, my voice shaking, "and you just committed felony property damage." "I am abating a nuisance." She took one last swing at a frame of brood, crushing the larvae into the grass. "I am protecting my property rights." Then the bees found her. She had been lucky for the first few minutes, probably because the bees were too confused to defend themselves. But now
The guard bees had rallied. She yelped, dropped the rake, swatted at her neck. "Ow! They're attacking me! They're attacking me!" She ran. She scrambled over the low section of the fence, sprinted across her pristine lawn, and slammed her back door. I stood there for a long time. I looked at the massacre. I looked at the crushed queen cells. I looked at the honey pooling in the grass, attracting ants. I walked over to the wreckage. I gently lifted one of the broken boxes. Empty. The bees were still in the air, a massive, swirling cyclone of gold and black. They were homeless, they were angry, and they were looking for a place to go. I went inside. I backed up the camera footage to the cloud. I called the sheriff to file a report.
My neighbor destroyed my livestock, I told the dispatcher. Yes, livestock, beekeeping equipment, value over $2,000. No, the threat is over, she retreated. I sat by the window and watched. Nature is resilient. Bees are resourceful. When a colony loses its home, it enters a specific mode. They gorge on honey, they cluster around the queen, and they scout for a new location immediately. They need a cavity, they need shelter, they need a defensible entrance roughly 10 feet off the ground. I saw the scouts first, a dozen of them, investigating the fence, investigating my shed. Then one scout found it. I watched through the zoom lens of my camera. A single bee landed on the vinyl siding of Karen's house. She walked up the white plastic, she found the gap in the soffit, she crawled inside. 30 seconds later, she came out. She flew back to the swirling cloud in my yard. She did a waggle dance in the air. I found it. I found the place. 10 more scouts went, then 100. Then the tone of the buzz changed. It shifted from the high-pitched whine of panic to the drive and engine roar of movement. The cloud shifted. It moved west. It moved up. It looked like a river of gold flowing uphill. Thousands of bees, 10,000, 40,000, 60,000. They poured over the fence. They crossed the property line, and they funneled with terrifying efficiency into the gap in Karen's siding. It took 20 minutes. By the time the sheriff arrived, my yard was silent. The bees were gone. They were in Karen's master bedroom wall. The sheriff took the report. He watched the video of Karen with the rake. He shook his head. "That's criminal mischief, possibly felony level, depending on the value," he said. "I'll go talk to her, but she's not answering the door." She wasn't answering because she was on the phone with code enforcement. The code enforcement officer, a guy named Reyes, who I've dealt with before on permit checks, showed up on Monday morning. Karen had demanded an emergency inspection for an active swarm attack. Reyes pulled up in his white truck. He had his clipboard. He looked weary. He walked up my driveway. "Mr. Torres," he said, "we got a call. Report of, well, millions of killer bees unleashed on the neighborhood." "Come on back," I said. We walked to the backyard. It was still a crime scene. I hadn't cleaned it up yet. Reyes stopped. He looked at the smashed boxes. He looked at the rake, which was still lying in the grass. He looked at the sticky, ant-covered mess. "What happened here?" Reyes asked. "My neighbor, Saturday morning. She decided to abate the nuisance herself." Reyes crouched down. He picked up a piece of a frame. He saw the Department of Agriculture brand on the wood. He saw the permit tag zip-tied to the twisted metal stand. "You were permitted? Permit number 2024-0911. Check your system." He checked his tablet.
"Yep, active, compliant. Inspection passed last November." He stood up. He walked around my yard. He measured the setback from the debris field to the fence. 22 feet, he muttered. "Code is 15. He looked at the water fountain. "Water source provided." He filled out his form. "Complaint unfounded. Property owner in compliance. apiary destroyed by vandalism. He ripped the pink cocky off and handed it to me. "You're clear, Mr. Torres. I'm sorry about your bees. This is a lot of damage." "Thank you, officer." He turned to leave. He clicked his pen. He was done. Then he stopped. He tilted his head, like a dog hearing a whistle only they can hear. "Do you hear that?" I stood next to him. "Hear what?" "That vibration." It was a low, throbbing hum. It wasn't coming from my yard. It was coming from the west. Reyes walked to the fence. He peered through the slats. He looked at Karen's house. The sun was hitting the west gable perfectly. The light caught the movement of the foragers coming and going. It was a busy highway, a constant stream of bees entering and exiting the jagged hole in the vinyl siding. Reyes watched them for a solid 10 seconds. He didn't say anything. He just watched the traffic flow. Then he looked at me. He looked at the empty, smashed boxes in my yard. He looked back at the house. "Mr. Torres," he said, and his voice was very quiet. Were those your bees?" "They were," I said, "until Saturday." "And now?" "Now they seem to be feral. They've relocated." Reyes looked at the gap in the soffit. He looked at the roofline. He squinted. "That's a structural violation," he whispered. "Soffit disrepair. Pest intrusion point." He pulled his clipboard back up. He flipped the page. He clicked his pen again. "Is she home?" "Her car's in the driveway." "I need to speak with her about her livestock."
Reyes walked around the block to Karen's front door. I went inside and watched on the monitors. I saw Reyes ring the doorbell. I saw Karen answer. She looked haggard. She was wearing a turtleneck, probably to hide the stings on her neck. She pointed aggressively at my house. She waved her arms. I couldn't hear the words, but I knew the script. Reyes didn't nod. He didn't write down her complaints. He waited for her to finish. Then he pointed at her roof. Karen stepped out onto the porch. She looked up. She froze. Reyes gestured to the clipboard. He started writing and writing and writing. He wasn't just looking at the bees. Now that he was inspecting her property, the blinders were off. He walked to the side of her house, the side she hides with the fence. He pointed at her air conditioning unit, which was sitting on a pallet instead of a concrete pad. Violation. He pointed at the downspout that was dumping water directly onto the sidewalk, creating a slip hazard. Violation. He walked into her backyard. He looked at the garden shed she had tucked in the corner. I knew for a fact that shed had electricity running to it, an extension cord buried under the mulch. Reyes found it. Violation. He spent 45 minutes at her house. When he came back to my door, he looked like a man who had just run a marathon of paperwork. "Mr. Torres," he said, "I just wanted to update you." "How did it go?" "Well, Ms. Mitchell is very upset. I imagine she is. I issued a notice of violation." He glanced at his notes. 22 counts, including structural disrepair, unpermitted electrical work, improper drainage, and harboring a public nuisance. "The nuisance being the bees," Reyes said. He almost smiled. "She insisted they are your bees. She wanted me to cite you for them." And I explained the law to her. Livestock is property when it is contained. When livestock escapes due to the intentional act of a third party and settles on that third party's land, it becomes feral wildlife. Until she establishes dominion over them, they are just nature. And since they are living in her structure due to her failure to maintain the soffit, she is harboring them. "Did you tell her how many there are?"
I estimated 60,000, Reyes said, based on the traffic flow. It's a strong colony, very active. They were my best producers, I said. She also has a rat problem, Reyes noted dryly. The unpermitted shed has a compost pile behind it that is active. I cited her for that, too. Vector control will be by tomorrow. 22 violations, I repeated.
And fines, Reyes said. She has 7 days to rectify the structural issues. After that, it's $250 a day. For the bees, specifically. He topped his clipboard. The irony is, if she hadn't called me out here to inspect you, I never would have seen the shed, or the drainage, or the soffit. She really should have just fixed the vinyl. She should have, I agreed. The next 3 days were a masterclass in acoustic torture for Karen. I know this because my bedroom shares a wall with the side of her house where the bees were. Even across the 15-foot gap between our homes, on a quiet night, I could hear the faint hum. For Karen, inside the room, it must have been deafening. Bees regulate the temperature of their hive. They keep the brood nest at exactly 95 degrees Fahrenheit. To do this, they vibrate their wing muscles. 60,000 bees vibrating against drywall creates heat. It creates noise. And then there is the smell. When a colony moves in, they start building comb immediately. They produce wax. They cure honey. The smell of a new hive is sweet but intense. Inside a wall cavity with no ventilation, it becomes cloying. And then there is the chewing. Bees need space. If the wall cavity is too narrow, they chew. They chew the drywall paper. They chew the insulation. It sounds like a million tiny typewriters clicking inside the wall. I saw the pest control trucks arrive on Tuesday. Not one, but 3 different companies. The first truck, Bug Be Gone, pulled up. The guy got out, looked at the roof, put on a suit, climbed a ladder. He came down 5 minutes later. He shook his head. He drove away. The second truck, Terminix, same story. The guy looked at the sheer volume of bees entering the soffit. He handed Karen a piece of paper and left. You see, you can't just spray a honeybee colony inside a wall. It is illegal in many places to kill honeybees indiscriminately, but even if you find an exterminator shady enough to do it, it's a terrible idea. If you kill 60,000 bees inside a wall, they die, obviously, but then they rot. 60,000 tiny corpses. If you leave that in the wall, the honey ferments, the dead bees decompose, the fluids seep through the drywall. It smells like a locker room full of dead animals dipped in sour syrup. And then the secondary scavengers come. Hive beetles, wax moths, ants, mice. They chew through the siding to get to the honey buffet. To fix this, you don't need an exterminator. You need a cutout specialist. You need someone who's half beekeeper, half contractor. You have to open the wall from the inside, vacuum the bees out alive, scrape every ounce of wax and honey, seal the void, and rebuild the wall. It is slow, it is messy, and it is expensive. I knew the going rate. For a ground-level cutout, maybe $1,200. For a second-story gable requiring scaffolding, start at $3,000. Karen came to my door on Wednesday evening. It was raining. The bees were all inside the wall, huddled for warmth. This meant they were vibrating harder. The noise in her bedroom would be like an engine idling on her pillow. She rang the bell. I opened it. She looked diminished. The aggressive posture was gone. The mummy scarf was gone, revealing 3 red welts on her neck. She looked exhausted. "Mateo," she said, no shouting. "Karen, they won't leave." I know. I can hear them, chewing. It's in the headboard. I can feel the heat on the wall. That's the brood nest, I said. They keep it at 95 degrees. Congratulations, your insulation is working. She flinched. I called the exterminators. They won't touch it. They said because it's honeybees, they need a special license, or they said the liability is too high. They're right. If they poison them, the honey rots. Your wall falls down in 6 months. One of them gave me a name, a specialist, Mike's Bee Removal. I know Mike, I said. He's good. He's the president of the local beekeeping guild. He quoted me. She swallowed. Her voice cracked. He quoted me $4,000 plus materials. Sounds about right. He has to rent scaffolding, and he has to replace the vinyl you let rot. She stared at me. The old anger flickered for a second. This is your fault. They are your bees. Karen, I said, leaning against the door frame, let's be very clear. On Saturday morning, they were my bees. They were in boxes I paid for on land I own. You trespassed. You committed criminal mischief. You destroyed their home. You forced them to evacuate. I didn't tell them to go into my house. No, you just created a refugee crisis next to a house with a hole in it. Actions have consequences, Karen. You don't get to choose where they land. You have to pay for it, she said. You have insurance. I do, but my insurance covers my property, not yours. And since the police report lists you as the perpetrator of the vandalism, my insurance company is actually going to be contacting you. Subrogation. They're going to want the money back for the hives you smashed. She went pale. I can't afford $4,000. I'm on a fixed income. You spend a lot of money on that lawyer's letter, I reminded her, and the cameras, and the specialized mulch. Please, she whispered, can't you just come get them? You're a beekeeper. Just put them in a box. I can't. They're inside the framing of your house. I'm not a licensed contractor. If I cut open your wall and hit a wire, I'm liable. I won't touch your house, Karen, not after you threatened to sue me for owning a truck. She stood there in the rain. She looked at my empty hive stands. She looked at her dark house, where 60,000 roommates were waiting for her. The city is fining me, she said, starting Monday. $250 a day. Then you better hire Mike, I said. He's busy this time of year. If you wait, he might be booked until June. Imagine how much honey they'll make by June. I reached into my pocket. I pulled out an envelope I'd been keeping by the door. Oh, and Karen, she looked up. This is the invoice for my equipment. 2 10-frame setups, deep supers, honey supers, excluders, bottom boards, and 2 Italian queens. Total replacement cost is $1,147. I handed her the envelope. You can pay me directly or wait for the small claims summons. The sheriff has the video of the rake. It's pretty damning. She took the envelope. It was wet with rain. You're enjoying this, she said bitterly. No, Karen, I'm really not. I loved those bees. I spent 4 years building those genetics. You killed a lot of them. You destroyed something beautiful because you wanted control. And now, you have no control. You have a wall of buzzing and a bill for $5,000. I stepped back. Good night, Karen. Try not to bang on the walls. It agitates them. I closed the door. She hired Mike. I watched the operation from my porch on Saturday. It took 2 days. Mike set up the scaffolding. He pulled off the siding. When he cut out the plywood sheathing, I could see it from my yard. It was magnificent.
6 feet of golden comb draped between the studs like heavy curtains. It was a masterpiece of engineering built in 7 days by 60,000 desperate refugees. Mike vacuumed them out, gently into a cage. He scraped the comb into buckets. He told me later they pulled out 40 pounds of honey. Karen watched from her patio, looking to feed it. She didn't vacuum the driveway that day. She paid Mike. She paid the fines for the shed, which she had to tear down. She paid the fines for the drainage. And 3 weeks later, a check appeared in my mailbox. $1,147. No note, just the check. The apiary is back now. I bought new boxes. I painted them afresh, bright white. I bought 2 new packages of bees, carniolans this time. They're darker, a bit more cold-hardy, and just as gentle. I set them up last weekend. I put the sugar water feeder on top. I watched the first scouts come out, orient themselves to the sun, and begin their flights. Karen was in her yard. She has a patch of new vinyl on her west gable. The white doesn't quite match the old faded siding. It's a bright, glaring square of brand new, right in the middle of her perfectly aged house. She saw me. She saw the new boxes. She froze. I saw her hand grip the handle of her rake. She was raking leaves, legally this time. She looked at the boxes. She looked at the patch on her wall. She looked at her bank account balance in her mind. She turned around. She walked inside. She closed the blinds. The bees are flying. The clover is blooming, and the air smells like honey. It's gonna be a good year.